Hey guys, thanks for joining me. My name is Mark. I'm with Couple of Fern Chapter, Florida Native Plant Society. Our statewide mission is the conservation, preservation, and restoration of Florida native plants and native plant communities. I'm going to go through our announcements really quickly, and then I will introduce our speakers for tonight's webinar. We are the chapter of the year, in case you don't know. We are celebrating our 10-year anniversary. We have quite a few webisodes and webinars already done, and we have many more on the way. So come celebrate with us. If you are a Couple of Fern member, please go to our website at this point and click on the icon to report your volunteer hours. It's super important. Follow the instructions. If you have been a member for a long time, you know the drill already. It just takes a few seconds of your time. So it's a quick report and done. And if you're interested to know, we've already reported well over 1,000 volunteer hours just this year, and the year is not up yet. So it's valued at over $24,000. So just 1,000 hours has a lot of value placed on it. Please continue reporting your volunteer hours. A big thank you to all of you out there. We do a lot of good work in our community, and your volunteer hours definitely show. So thank you. If you are a Seminole Master Gardener, so please note that this program qualifies towards your continuing education hours. So this would be 1 hour of continuing education for the Seminole Master Gardener program. And then come grow with us on your native plant journey. So we have events, field trips, workshops, lots of virtual learning right now due to COVID. Community gardening, internships. Matter of fact, one of our interns just completed her internship with us earlier this month. We have plants. There's lots going on with a Couple of Ferns, so in case you are interested, please join. And joining is very easy. Just go to fnps.org. You'll find the button that says join, and then you can select Couple of Fern from the drop-down box. So we are here in Seminole County, and we have a focus around Central Florida. As far as memberships are concerned, they have different levels. They have student, individual, household, as well as business level memberships. So consider those for a way of supporting Florida Native Plant Society. We are accepting social media nerds at this point. So in case you are interested in joining us and learning, collectively, we call it social learning. We have a Facebook junior editor position available, and it is online anytime, so it can work around your schedule. We will teach you the back end of things, so optimization, analytics, digital engagement testing. Those are some core ideas that you will actually learn from the experience. And it could be a college internship. So in case you know somebody or a loved one that would be interested, please refer this availability to them. If you're looking at this as a job reference, we can certainly provide that after 6 months. Or for most of us, it's just a simple way of giving back to the community. So in case you are native plant oriented or plant oriented just in general, you'll definitely find your home with us. As far as our upcoming events, so on September 27th, Doug Talmy is presenting to the Audubon Society, and pre-registration is needed. It's at 6 p.m. On September 26th, which is a day earlier, we're having our garden chat on baby native plants. So in case you find seedlings out there and around your yard or around in natural areas, you don't know what they are, they're just emerging, we'll have some helpful slides prepared for you at this garden chat. Our directors, Deah, Kaylee, and Jennifer are doing an amazing job of putting together this garden chat series. So tune in September 26th. It'll be online, free. It's visible to all on YouTube as well as Facebook. October 11th is our following garden chat, and we're calling this Bat Chat. And Bat Chat is all about Florida bats that you will commonly find, either in your neighborhood or in natural areas that you can, basically readily identify. So that will be online as well, Facebook and YouTube. No pre-registration required. It is visible to all. And then October 12th is our next program, and it's going to be with Florida conservation voters. They'll be telling us a little bit about their success stories on conservation lands across the state. And it's going to be at 7 p.m. right here on Facebook and YouTube. Again, another free webinar courtesy of Couple of Fern. So tonight we have emerging exotic invasive plant concerns with Dr. Deah Lieurance and Alex Onisko. So let me briefly introduce them both to you, and then Dr. Lieurance will take over. So Deah is an extension scientist in the agronomy department at the University of Florida. She has been the coordinator of IFAS Assessment, non-native plants in Florida's natural area since 2013. She received her PhD from Wright State University. Alex Onisko is the invasive species biologist for South Florida Water Management District and specializes in upland and wetland ecosystems. She recently received her master's degree from the University of Florida in August 2020. A huge congrats, Alex. Her research focused on new invasive wetland species of Scleria, which are nutrushes, in Central and South Florida. Together, Deah and Alex will discuss Florida invasive plants here in our state, specifically ones that native plant enthusiasts will encounter in Central Florida. Some exotic native plants cost millions of dollars to contain and cause great alterations at the detriment and health of our natural ecosystems. Together with understanding how invasive plants cause problems, the IFAS Assessment, and some of the new lesser-known invasive plants, this should be a very interesting webinar. So please welcome Deah and Alex.
All right, let me get this screen up. Share. And, okay. Well, I just want to thank you for the invitation to come talk about invasive species. This is something that's become my life's work. I'm very passionate about it. Today, I'm going to walk you through the process of invasive species, the impacts of invasive species, and walk through some of the prevention, the ways we try to prevent invasive species. So this is a bit of an overview of what we'll cover. We're going to talk about, I think it's really important at this point to establish clear definitions and get the terminology down. I will note that we're, university extension folks and other faculty and staff are trying to get away from the term exotic, that, it's kind of an archaic term. So I will be giving you the terms that we, as the Invasive Species Council, came to a consensus on in terms of the definitions we're trying to consistently use across the state. Then we're going to go through the invasion process. Next, negative impacts of invasive species, and these will be environmental, economic, and negative impacts to human health. Then we'll go through the invasion curve, which fits really nicely into what I do at the IFAS Assessment. And then just a brief discussion of integrated methods to manage invasive plants. So to establish this terminology, first we're going to go through, this is going to seem pretty obvious, but it's important to establish. So first, a native species is a species that occurs naturally in a specified geographic area. Next, non-native is a species that does not occur naturally in a specified geographic area. An established species is a species having a self-sustaining and reproducing population in a specified geographic area. And then finally, we have our invasive species. This is a species that is non-native to the ecosystem under consideration. It's spreading and whose presence is causing or is likely to cause environmental or economic harm or that harm to human health. Also important to note that invasive species can be plants, animals, and other organisms. So I put together this graphic to just show this is the invasion process. This is modified from Timothy Blackburn put this model together. But essentially, for an invasive species to become an invasive species, it has to first be transported to the new geographic location. Then it has to be introduced. Then it has to establish. Then it has to spread. And then finally, it has to cause those negative impacts. But there are barriers at each one of these steps that can keep a non-native species from becoming invasive. And those might be as simple as, the climates don't match, or there weren't enough individuals to be able to reproduce and spread. But what's really important to note here is that not all introductions result in an invasion. So the next few slides, I'm just going to walk through each of these steps to illustrate exactly what we're talking about. So first, in terms of transport, I use this map. This is a map of global shipping routes, and it's a reverse heat map. So the lighter the color, the more frequent the journeys of ships that, go from port to port. And you can just see how interconnected, the world is. And with increasing globalization and, trade agreements, we're just going to keep moving stuff around. Additionally, this is just shipping routes. Think about the number, how quickly you can hop a plane and just go to Europe. So there's a lot of opportunities to move things around. And then next we'll talk about the pathways. With pathways, there are intentional and accidental pathways for introduction. And the intentional, it's pretty obvious here as well, but many of the species that we release for horticulture or agriculture are non-native. So, if you think about what you're seeing at the box stores in terms of what people are putting in their yards, maybe it's, lantanas or different ruilias, those are non-native. There's also another example of intentional introductions, the Shakespeare example. Now, this is about birds, but there was a gentleman in New York City who was really into Shakespeare plays, and he wanted to release all of the birds that were mentioned in those plays to Central Park. And this is how it's thought that we got. That we got European starlings. And then the final example here is for erosion control and wildlife improvement. So the example here is kudzu, the vine that ate the South. Around the time that the Dust Bowl was happening in the West, there was a lot of ecological refugees, people who were displaced because of the drought and losing their farms and such. So a lot of them moved either to the West Coast or the East Coast. And around the same time, the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Tennessee Valley Authority, they were looking for ways to prevent that erosion from hitting other parts of the country. And one of the things that they thought would help would be to intentionally plant kudzu all over southeastern United States. So that's just one of the point introductions for kudzu. There were millions of cuttings that were just intentionally planted along roadsides. You can also see some of these advertisements, valuable new forage plant in Florida, and then grow a vine like this over your porch. I mean, they were literally advertising these things on how quickly they grew. Best intentions, maybe not the best result. And so next we'll talk about accidental. You can have with ballast water and unprocessed wood or shipping materials. You think about all those ships that are going back and forth, planes and whatnot. If those materials are not treated, whatever critters are living in the wood or in that ballast water can get, transported to the new location. And that's the example here with this little green insect, the emerald ash borer. They thought that it came over in these pallets and other wood, ash from overseas. So the larva was in the wood, and when it came over to the United States, the adults emerged. And now we are looking at an entire genus of trees east of the Rockies that might just go extinct. And then the final picture we have here is that this is actually a land manager friend of mine from up north, but it's a really nice example of how, hitchhikers happen. So you think about all those seeds that might stick to your clothing or stick to animals. That's another way that we can move propagules around. So it's good to pause here. I actually put this in a lot for Master Gardener talks, but I think it's really important to understand your role. Roughly 82 to 94% of all non-native invasive plants are linked in some way to the ornamental plant trade, forestry, or agriculture. With that higher number, the 94%, that's 94% of all woody invasive plants in the United States. And so here you see, this is, a close-up of a Ruellia flower. And then the picture on the right is an escaped population out in a natural area. So I try to stress this with specifically with gardeners that, be careful with what you're putting into the landscape. So moving on to establishment, we talk about, there's different filters I mentioned at the beginning here. One of the easiest things and most intuitive examples about how a species can become established is thinking about climate matching. And so I've taken this map and I put these lines over so you could just see how much of, in the Northern Hemisphere, how much of Asia, Northern Africa, and Europe overlap with the climates of the United States. And so, so down here, the climates here would really match up quite well to, Florida. So an example of this would be this mimosa. This is a map from GBIF. These are all verified points where mimosa has been, vouchered. And you can just see in the native range in Asia how much of that just really lines up with the United States. And again, it makes sense. If, the climate is roughly the same, you have similar landscapes, it gives a leg up to those non-natives that get brought over. And then next we'll talk about spreading. So there are multiple traits of biological traits of invasive plants. And I'm focusing here on those that are specific to, reproduction, dispersal, and spread. So a lot of invasive species have a very short time to reproduction. They make a lot of seeds, illustrated here with this Brazilian pepper and Melaleuca, the capsules from the Melaleuca. In fact, some Melaleuca trees are thought to produce up to 10 million seeds per tree. They are very efficiently dispersed. Like, these Brazilian pepper seeds are, fruits are very showy and bright and bird dispersed. And the case with Melaleuca, anything you do with a Melaleuca, if you burn it, try to control it in any way, it causes those little capsules that you see there to explode. And then the seeds will come out, and they're very small and they can blow in the wind. And then also up at the top there, we can talk about vegetative spread. This is running bamboo, a picture of running bamboo culms that are sort of escaping their planting. So you can have bamboo, really taking, a lot of space up just through below ground rhizotomous spread. And finally, we get to the impacts. So this is going to be broken down to ecosystem, economic, and human health. So ecosystem impacts that you might see with a big invasion, changes in water and nutrient cycling, altered disturbance regimes, illustrated here with the Melaleuca fire. Those fires burn hot and fast, way different than the normal fire cycle in the Everglades in South Florida. There are increases in resource competition. On the bottom here, we have climbing fern. The resource that's being, the natives are being outcompeted here is light. And then ultimately you end up with a reduction of native species. Next, we can talk about the economic cost of biological invasions. You'll find significant impacts to recreation, agriculture, ecosystem services. The example, a big problem in Florida is citrus greening, which is a bacterial infection that's vectored by a non-native insect. It's decimated over 80% of citrus in Florida. And it's estimated that the state of Florida lost $1.7 billion over 5 years to our economy. So that's substantial. Not to mention, what's happening to people who their generations have been in the citrus farming. And then if we want to talk about management costs, it's estimated that management costs of invasive species are over $100 million per year in Florida. We worked on a little project where we drilled that down on how much are we spending to control plants on public lands, so your state and national parks in Florida. And the estimate we got over 6 years was $45 million per year. This was work done by Drew Hyatt. He did the bulk of the number crunching for us. But in the bar graph that you see here, it's broken down. Blue is aquatic species, green for terrestrial. And what I'd like to highlight is that, of that $45 million per year, the majority of that is taken up by just a few species. So if we could just stop one hydrilla, well, we would save $10 million per year if that were to become a major invader in the state. And now moving on to human health. Again, we use a good example here with an animal, but if you've heard of the giant African land snail, this thing pops up periodically. They do a lot of damage to, they eat more than the native snails. And there are some cases where they do get on stucco and do damage to people's houses. But it's also thought that they might be carriers of rat lungworm, which can be quite deadly for humans. But what's a good example of plants? This is giant hogweed, and I want to be incredibly clear that we do not have giant hogweed in Florida. It's more Pennsylvania, Jersey, that part of the United States. But it's a really good example of just how much a plant could hurt a person. They've got beautiful, big, showy flowers. They're related to Queen Anne's lace, really tall stature. These things were used in Victorian-style gardening. And if you try to control this species and you get any of the juice, like any of the juices from the inside of that plant on your skin, you get severe burns. And I'm showing day 8, 9, and month 5 of someone who got into some giant hogweed. The first 2 or 3 days is pretty brutal. It looks like 3rd-degree burns. So when this stuff is found, there is like really intense early detection, rapid response efforts to try to eradicate these plants as soon as possible. People have lost their eyes, lost their vision in their eyes if that sap gets in their eyes. So it's no joke. So that's a pretty dramatic example, but other examples to human health might be as simple as, you're allergic. It's a non-native plant. You're not used to the pollen, and every year you have to deal with the allergies. So definitely can influence the quality of life. So now we move into the invasion curve. This is a pretty simple concept. Essentially, the non-native species enters. As you move through time, the area invaded increases, and so does the management cost. We want to try to stay down here because once you get up into this control and management phase, the odds of eradicating the species are virtually not there. So we're just trying to keep our head above water with that. So for that reason, we like to stay down here in the prevention eradication end. An economic analysis in Australia indicated that for every $1 spent on prevention, there's roughly a $25 return on investment. Once you get into control and management, that goes down to about a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-5. So we really want to focus on this prevention end. And so Florida, why are we just overrun with invasive species? Partially, or actually significantly, because we have a tropical, subtropical climate. Again, we have the tourism and the trade. Think about Disney, think about Universal, all the cruise ships. We have multiple ports of entry and multiple international airports. In fact, about 85% of all non-native plants enter through Florida, enter the United States through Florida. And I believe there's roughly 2,800 native plant species in the state. We do have 1,400 vouchered non-native species within the state of Florida. Important to note, not all of those are invasive, but it's a pretty staggeringly high number. So this is where the IFAS assessment comes in. We have 3 tools. One predicts, evaluates the risk hopefully before the species enters the state. Status assessment diagnoses the invasion. So we use this on species that are here. The Infraspecific Taxon Protocol is used to evaluate the invasion risk of cultivars. I'll just go through these really quickly. The predictive tool is based on a tool that a protocol that was developed in Australia. We modified it to fit the climate, precipitation, and soil type of Florida. Again, we want to evaluate species that are new to the state, proposed for new use. So we're written into FDAC's non-native plant rule. And then upon specific requests, so people will come to me and specifically ask for a species to be evaluated. And we have over 200, I think we're around 220 species now in our database, including this beach Hyptis. It's a high-risk species based on its invasiveness elsewhere and negative ecosystem impacts. Next up, the status assessment. Again, species that are already here. The state is divided into 3 zones, so you can have a very different conclusion for North and South Florida, just based on, is it frost tolerant? No, well, it might be okay in North, but not in the South. We want to describe the status of the species based on the ecological impacts, the potential for expanded distribution, how hard is it to manage, and if there's any economic value. And to do this, we incorporate field data from experts in the field. There's over 600 species that have been evaluated with this tool, and we do regularly reevaluate them to make sure nothing's changed. And the final tool is the Infraspecific Taxon Protocol. I have wild type Ruellia simplex and Lantana here, and on the right of those, these are improved cultivars. We want to make sure that those cultivars are not going to be as invasive or worse than the parent species. This is mainly an internal tool, but I've done a couple of these for the state. We just want to know that it's going to behave differently and not be invasive. So all the Ruellia cultivars in our database are cautions, managed to prevent escape. That's because they do sucker and spread a bit. But the Lantana here is, it is actually sterile, and so is the pollen. And you can access the assessment at assessment.ifas.ufl.edu. There are ways to filter and download into an Excel spreadsheet. And here are the possible conclusions. It's simple: red light, yellow light, green light. So for status assessment and ITP conclusions, invasive means no. Nobody at the university should be recommending these things. Caution, manage to prevent escape, and then not a problem species may be recommended. Similarly, with predictive tool conclusions, we just switch out the words with risk: high invasion risk, moderate risk, and low invasion risk. And then finally, the general management strategies. Again, I stress this prevention, early detection, and rapid response. If we get into that low end of the invasion curve, we can really, ideally, we want to know about these things before they even arrive. But once they do become invasive, there are different methods for managing them. There's mechanical. You see this harvester pulling what I think is water hyacinth out of the water. The second photo on the top, that's some folks in an airboat going out to spray Lygodium out in the middle of the Everglades. And then, of course, biocontrol. And then, really what's the best strategy is to think about integrated pest management. So timing. And, when do you do mechanical, chemical, or biocontrol? Do you hit it with chemical and then let the plant flesh out, and then the biocontrols drill the plants? So there's a real science about this, and people have devoted their lives to figuring out the best way to kill these plants without using the least amount of chemicals. So the idea is to really take care of these plants without, doing the minimal amount of encroachment on the native areas, natural areas. And so here are the take-home bullets. Not all non-native species are invasive. Invasive species cause harm to ecosystems, our economy, and sometimes to human health. The longer it takes to identify an invader, the more the damage is done, with the idea that prevention is the best option. IFAS Assessment is a public resource, so we work a lot with the community. It's a part of the land grant mission at UF. And then invasive plant management is much more complicated than simply spraying herbicides. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up and stop sharing.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have a question from a member of Orange Audubon Society, and I believe it's Deborah. Hi, Deborah. Deborah writes, are all bamboos invasives? People I know continue to plant them, and I don't know how to discourage this.
So not all bamboos are invasive, but I would be very careful in what you're planting. So running bamboos, I wouldn't plant those ever. Clumpers, they definitely aren't as invasive, but they can grow to be quite large. And from talking to different people who do invasive plant removal, once a clumping bamboo gets big enough, the only way to get rid of that thing is to dig it out. And so, even the ones that are not officially, spreading and encroaching on things, it's still something that I think people should consider. The other thing I think about with bamboos is that, typically your running bamboos are temperate, suited for temperate climates, and your clumpers are better in more tropical and subtropical. So if you plant a running bamboo in South Florida, it might not do so well. But I personally discourage anybody from planting any bamboo because I have my reasons.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I may know what your reasons are, but yeah, better it's hard to change your mind with bamboos. And if people are looking for a screen, like a vegetative screen for their backyard or a fence substitute, there are other more forgiving plants out there.
Yeah, I will say that I did do some research on bamboos. So we did risk assessments on 47 species total, and we were able to, we got a publication out of it to really get it out there in the scientific literature that, hey, you should not be planting running bamboos. So
yeah,
hopefully it helped.
Only time will tell. Hopefully they'll hear us out. Folks, if you're just tuning in, we'll be happy to take some of your questions live. I'm going to turn it over to Alex at this point, Alex Onisko. She's going to actually go a little bit more in depth and discuss some of the lesser known that are already present in some areas, but have the ability to expand their territory. So please welcome Alex at this point.
Thank you. Hi. It's hard to tell how many folks are tuned in, but yeah, like Mark said, we're going to change gears a little bit. And thanks, Deah, for kind of setting up the scene and covering a lot of that different terminology and the basics of invasive plant management. So as I get set up a little, make sure you can still see everything you need to. So what I'm going to cover in this presentation, like Mark said, is some of the invasive plants of Central Florida. A few of the ones that I have actually aren't found in Seminole County yet. Either they haven't been vouchered or perhaps they're underdocumented on apps like EdMaps or iNaturalist, but they are in Central Florida, closer to Seminole County. So I'm going to start by going over 10 different species in the Central Florida area. Unfortunately, there were a lot of different species I could have covered for this talk. So I decided to skip some of the usual suspects and focus on some that may be newer to some of you. And the first couple that we'll go over are actually not only new to Central Florida, but new to the state of Florida. So we'll jump right in. The first species we'll look at is called lesser roundweed, or Hyptis brevipes. This is in the Laniaceae family. The FISC list, which is the Florida Invasive Species Council, which is formerly FLEPC, is a list of category 1 and 2 invasive species that a lot of land managers and different agencies and organizations use to kind of prioritize which invasive species they should manage on their properties. Just to go over these terms really quickly, A Category 1 invasive species is a plant that's altering native plant communities by displacing native species, changing community structure, or disrupting ecological functions. And then a Category 2 invasive species is an invasive exotic that's increased in abundance or frequency, but hasn't yet altered Florida plant communities. And Category 2 invasive species do have the potential to become a Category 1. So I'll be using those terms throughout the rest of the presentation. So I wanted to get you acquainted with those. But back to lesser roundweed, this species was just identified in Florida in probably the past 5 to 8 years. Its origin is in Mexico, the Caribbean, and South America. And it's found in agricultural areas, rural areas, ecotones, and in Florida, we're finding it in floodplains and marshes. And this is a documented weed in Southeast Asia, particularly in rice agriculture. And it's thought that these seeds from lesser roundweed were a contaminant in rice, and that's how they got to the state. So how you can identify lesser roundweed if you're out in your natural communities, going for a hike or botanizing for fun, is by its flower heads. And there is a native species look-alike called musky mint or Hyptis. So they're in the same genus, two different species and with two totally different origins. These two species do occur in similar habitats, and they have a similar appearance. But lesser roundweed has very short peduncles or stalks that the flower heads are on, and you can see the picture on the right is of lesser roundweed, and the picture on the left is Hyptis, our native. You can see that the Hyptis has peduncles that can reach over an inch in length, whereas brevipes, or the lesser roundweed, their peduncles are only 3 to 16 millimeters long. The flower heads are also kind of different. I think that our native has more of like a disc base with a dome over top, whereas lesser roundweed are tight clustered balls that contain all the flowers. So this next species we'll look at is another species that's new to the state of Florida. It was first identified back in 2015, I believe, and this species is close to me because it is one of the species that I studied as part of my master's research. And so tropical nutrush, or Scleria microcarpa, is in the Cyperaceae or sedge family. This has been listed as a Category 1 invasive species, and the IFAS Assessment records it as invasive in Central Florida and cautions the use of it in North and South Florida. I don't think this species is something that's used for landscape. The seeds probably entered the state through contamination or trade. It's not a very desirable species, I would say. Where we're finding it in Florida is in forested wetlands, mostly in cypress understory along fringes of lakes in Central Florida. And so how do you know you have tropical nutrush or Scleria microcarpa when you're out in the woods? This species can be identified by at first glance looking like a clumping grass, although it is, like I said before, a sedge. It has these hard white, very small seeds, and these are integral for any identification of any Scleria seed or species, excuse me. These seeds, to me, resemble little tiny acorns, and they can be found still attached to the seedling plants, to those first roots that protrude from the seed casing. They can also be found on the inflorescence of the plant, as you can see in the third photo over. And lastly, a good way to identify this species, if you're familiar at all with identifying grasses by using a feature called the ligule. All of the species in the genus Scleria have a contraligule, and they can sometimes be described as deltoid or lanceolate. These, once they reach maturity, are mostly lanceolate. And let me see if I can get my pointer over there to show you that's the contraligule. So, the next species we'll look at in Florida, in Central Florida, this probably is familiar to a lot of you if you're up to date on invasive species in your area. This is a more common invasive species, coral Ardisia. And this one is actually listed on the Florida noxious weed list and is prohibited in the state. This is a FIS Category 1 invasive species. It originates from Japan and northern India and can be found in forests and hammocks in Central Florida. And just to note, this is toxic to livestock. And so that could be, a good influence to get it off of some of these properties that potentially have cattle, and maybe a reason not to plant it around your house too. So to identify coral Ardisia, it's typically a small upright shrub. The literature says that it can grow up to about 6 feet in height. I've mostly seen it on me about waist to chest high, so 3 to 4 feet in height. It is mostly noticed by those bright red, berries that grow on the plant and hang on the underside of it. But a great way to identify this plant, if you don't have flowers or fruit available, are the leaves. The leaves are dark green and kind of thick with a waxy cuticle, but the most noticeable feature is the scalloped edge around the leaves, and it's kind of apparent in some of these pictures. I tried to find a better one, but even from a distance, you can kind of tell that there's scalloped edges to all these leaves, and that's going to be your dead giveaway as to what species this is. Another aggressive invasive species in Central Florida that you may or may not be familiar with is cat's claw vine. This is another noxious weed in Florida and another Category 1 invasive species. The IFAS Assessment deems it as a high invasion risk in all regions throughout the state. This originates in China. Its origin is Central and South America, and you can find it growing in hammocks in Central Florida. It is noted to be invasive in China, Australia, South Africa, and the Southeast United States. And this vine disrupts natural communities by climbing up the forest canopy and producing a thick blanket or curtain of vegetation that can smother trees and prevent sunlight from reaching the understory. And when you're identifying cat's claw vine, you want to be careful because there are 3 native species that at a quick glance can look really similar to cat's claw vine. And I think the 3 most common native species that it can be confused with are Carolina jessamine, crossvine, and trumpet creeper. And you can see those pictures of those 3 species are on the diagonal on the right. If you are lucky enough to see them in flower, you can do some quick looks to distinguish, to determine it's not cat's claw vine by the orange flowers on crossvine and trumpet creeper. But if you have Carolina jessamine, you notice it also has tubular yellow flowers similar to cat's claw vine. So the next thing you'll want to look for is the 3-pronged tendril, which is what gives cat's claw vine its common name. And you can see the pictures on the bottom row, the cat's claw flower, the vine itself with the tendrils, the 3-pronged tendrils at the tip of the growing portion of the vine, and then a really good picture over here. And that's, again, going to be your giveaway as to having the ability to identify cat's claw vine. So we're going to change gears a little bit, and I wanted to include at least one aquatic invasive species. You know, if you're botanizing by kayak or canoe or boat, you have a chance of running into crested floating heart. This species is a lot more common in South Florida, but it is invasive in South Carolina, and it is frost proof. So I would anticipate that it could make its way into Central Florida fairly easily, especially considering how many lakes, ponds, and canals there are up that way. And so this is another one of those species that are listed in the Florida noxious weed list and a Category 1 invasive. And again, these commonalities between these species, like Deah was mentioning earlier, their climate matches. I don't know if you're noticing, a lot of these are from Asia or Australia. And as I mentioned, these are found in lakes, ponds, ditches, and canals, and are invasive in South Carolina. So the best way to identify crested floating heart or Nymphoides cristata is to look for a membranous ruffled crest along the upper midvein of the petals of the flower. This species has these really small, delicate white flowers. They almost look to float across the water, so they're very eye-catching, but you have to get up close to correctly identify them. And you should be aware that there are other native Nymphoides species in the state. The most similar one is going to be Nymphoides aquatica. It also has a small white flower, but it lacks this crest on the upper side of the petals. It isn't there. So, you know, for once, we have some good common names that'll key you in on what you're looking for, and you're looking for that that crest in the flower. There are some other ways to distinguish between the species. The floating leaves on the species are heart-shaped, whereas the native is a bit more round, and the native has a bit more texture and is a little bit thicker, but a lot of times those identifiers can be a little bit subjective. So really the best way to identify it in the wild is looking at that crest of the flower. Our next species is Downy rose myrtle, and I would definitely caution this one. This species is a big problem for land managers in South Florida and Southwest Florida. This is also on our noxious weed list, a Cat 1 invasive species originating from Asia again. This species mostly invades pinelands. So it's been spreading in Florida. It's been taking over the understory of native pinelands, and some of the literature does suggest that it is altering natural fire regimes of southern Florida. This was introduced as a landscape plant, but once it escapes cultivation, it can form very dense monocultures that are difficult to manage. So this is a fairly easy species to identify, especially if it's in flower. It has these very showy fuchsia or light pink flowers. I believe they're somewhat fragrant, but really they're going to be eye-catching. And if you see this plant and it doesn't have flowers, it's not in bloom, surefire, always works way to identify it is by flipping over one of the leaves and looking at the underside of the leaf. You can see in the picture on the right, there's 3 main midveins that come off of the leaf base, and one of those veins, or 2 of them really, seem to follow the margin of the leaves. And I don't think there are really any native species with that feature. So that's going to be your best way, aside from the flowers, to really identify the species on a go. This is carrotwood. This is another species that's I'm pretty familiar with in South Florida, but it could be making its way up to your area. I've found it in both Polk and Osceola counties when I've been up that way. And I think this has a lot of potential to invade because it does invade such a variety of natural communities. But this is another one that's on our noxious weed list, a category 1 invasive species hailing from Australia. This species can invade dunes, coastal strand, sand pine scrub, slash pine, flatwoods, cypress swamps. I mean, it's very diverse, but I think that it poses the most threat in coastal ecosystems, like in mangrove swamps or tropical hammocks. I've seen it really invade scrubby areas as well. It doesn't seem to mind having a lack of water. And once the species is introduced into a natural area, it can form dense monocultures, crowding out our native species and outcompeting them for nutrients and light. Another way this species gets around is these seeds are ingested by birds and small mammals. And these seeds, that I just mentioned, are going to be your best way to identify this species, although it's not in fruit all year round. But the third picture over shows these bright orange red seeds. And so this is an evergreen tree. As you saw in the last photo, it can reach, heights of about over 30 feet tall. The trunk is gray and on the outside, and it's given its name carrotwood because it does have an orange heartwood to it. Although I've talked to some wood turners, and it's really not, although it's beautiful, it's not a desirable wood to try to really do anything with once it's cut down. If you do find this species in the wild and you don't have any fruits or any flowers to help you identify it, something I find kind of really useful in the field is looking at the leaves. The leaves are alternate and one's compound, but they have these swollen petioles at the base of each leaf, and that is apparent even in seedlings. I might have to pause really quick. We've got a train going by. I'll let it honk. But yeah, so we'll move on. The next species we're going to look at is day blooming jessamine. And so this one's a little bit different. This is an invasive species, but it's not as established and widespread as some of the other species we've looked at. You'll see this one is a Flepsy category or a FIS category 2 invasive species. So remember, this is invasive, but it hasn't necessarily reproduced in densities where it would alter native plant communities in as destructive as a category 1 invasive species. So day blooming jessamine is from South America, and it prefers disturbed sites, pastures, and forest edges. And it really doesn't tolerate any shade. So you're going to find it in more open areas. This species, I've found it growing in disturbed marshes and really taking over. It was first introduced as an ornamental shrub, and it's escaped cultivation and naturalized in quite a few regions throughout the state. So if you think you've come across day blooming jessamine, again, fruits and flowers are going to be your best bet to try to hone in and figure out which species you're looking at. When it is in flower, you want to look for these small clustered white flowers. they have these curled lobes. It almost looks like they're just like reversed, curled out, and there aren't really any petals, so to say. Not only are they beautiful, but they smell great. They smell like powdery perfume. And when you do get into an area that's invaded with a monoculture of these species, it's almost overpowering how fragrant these trees can be. You also want to look for dark purple to black berries. And if neither of those identifiers are present, you can look to the leaves. These are medium dark green on the surface, and what will catch your eye is that they have a paler light green on the underside. Another feature that I look for is the bark. I think the bark of this shrub is very similar to lantana. It's almost like a pale, chalky green white color. Um, and that can help you identify the species as well. So I think the last couple species that we're going to look at, this one is another one that's considered invasive, and it is a category 2 listed invasive species, but it may not be as prevalent throughout the state. This one really seems to hug central Florida, northern and central Florida, and kind of it's spreading down the center of the state. So the IFAS assessment cautions the use of this species, and I noticed that there is a reassessment in progress, but you can mostly find this species in disturbed areas, forests, swamps, and floodplains. Where I've seen it growing the most is along the floodplain and the river edge of the Kissimmee River. So anywhere in that watershed, I would expect it to continue to move south or move with the water. I thought it was interesting that the species is considered invasive in both Hawaii and France. And so if you're, too far, out in the field and you come across what you think is wax begonia, you want to look for a few different key features. Begonias are generally grown for their attractive white and pink flowers that produce all summer long, as well as their attractive foliage. And wax begonias can branch out to about 24 inches wide away from the main stalk, and they can reach about 18 inches tall, and they create kind of like these big succulent mounds of green leaves. This species in particular has scalloped edges to their leaves, and of course those pink and white flowers. And the leaves, when they're young, they can appear a little bit heart-shaped. I think when they're a little bit older than this, they'll start to form more of that cordate shape, but they will always have the same features of a lot of other succulents. You may be able to tell, at least get close to what species it is, knowing that. So this is the last species we'll look at as part of this presentation, and this isn't technically considered an invasive species, although it is established in natural areas. There is an assessment from UF in progress right now to try to help determine whether this is a true invasive or not, but it's been on the landscape for many years now and doesn't seem to be too aggressive or spreading too widely. But I don't know if I mentioned its name. This is spider flower. It used to be Cleome, but they went and changed the genus on me. Like I said, it's not listed because there's an assessment in progress and there's determining whether this is truly invasive. But I thought it would be a good one to show you all, so you could keep an eye out for it. And the photo on this slide is actually taken in Shingle Creek Natural Area, and in the winter time, this is an annual species, so in the winter it seems to germinate and grow rapidly, and it reaches heights of about 6 to 7 feet tall. Some individuals can be that tall, and it's super thick and hard to walk through. If you do find yourself in an area where you think you've encountered the species, it should be fairly easy to tell. Those showy purple-pink flowers with their long stamens is partially how this species got its common name of spider flower. Their alternate leaves and this palmy construction is really eye-catching and noticeable. But again, a lot of the times I go on how a plant feels or the way it smells, and you've got both of those indicators with the species. Not only does it have prickles on the stems and leaves, but it also is covered in this glandular pubescence. And when you touch the plant, it'll be sticky. The stems are sticky, you're sticky, everything's sticky, and there's a really funky smell that goes along with these individuals as well. So I know that was like a rapid fire ID session for a lot of folks. So I am going to share these slides with Mark, and he can share them with you all upon request. I got, there are a lot of great resources online to help find information about all these species and identifying features, as well as ways to report your sightings of them. So I'm going to leave those up there too. And that pretty much concludes the whirlwind ID session.
It was fascinating. So we have questions pouring in. Alex, you were wondering how many people are viewing. There are 12 on Facebook and 13 on YouTube. So let's get with it. So Gia writes, I had no idea begonias were invasive. Are these the same ones you commonly see sold in garden centers?
They are, yeah. I think wax begonia comes from, it's one of like a handful of the original begonias, and they've been heavily cultivated. So there's, I want to say, like thousands of species of begonia, but this is an invasive species in Florida. I don't know specifically how many potentially invasive species there are.
And Kevin writes on the same lines. He said, I had no idea cleome was invasive. So not all cleomes are invasive.
Yeah, and this one's still up for debate. Like I said, it's established. It's definitely established in some natural areas, but there are herbaria records of it occurring. I could be wrong on my exact year, but I want to say as early as the 30s in Florida. So sometimes that can play a part into consideration. How long has it been in the state? How has it moved around? How is it affecting the local ecology? So I think some of those answers are still yet to unravel.
Yet to be seen, right?
Yeah, thank you.
I'll jump in here and just say that this is a really good, when I showed the invasion curve, what Alex is putting out there, these are some species that we're keeping an eye on. So if you're seeing them do or pop up in places where they shouldn't be, like that's the kind of information that can help us provide the bigger picture information, like, oh, well, this thing it's hit its threshold. It went from just being a disturbance weed. Now it's really encroaching into natural areas. And that's when those sort of conclusions change and those species end up moving, say, from a category 2 to a category 1 with FISC.
Thanks, Deah. And feel free to jump in. It's a huge help. So yeah, I thought I'd include a few species that would just be good to get on folks' radars so that they can help us. The more eyes out there looking at what's out there and reporting it, communicating it is a huge help for us.
Yeah, and Crested Floating Heart Would have never guessed that would have been an invasive one. Deah, we have some questions rolling in for you, so I'll take it one by one. Folks, if you have questions, please post them, and Alex and Deah will be happy to answer some of them for you. So Kevin Songer again writes, permaculture food plants are becoming more popular, and many of these are exotic species. How does permaculture food operations fit into risk assessment of invasive issues?
So I don't really, it really hasn't come to our office in terms of permaculture. But what I will say, in terms of new species that are being introduced and planted around the state, a lot of folks are looking for alternative crops in general. And some of those might be, you might be talking about the large scale planting versus, someone just, putting things in their landscape that they can eat, just for their own household. But typically when something is going to be planted in an area more than 2 acres, and it's non-native, the state requires a permit under the non-native planting rule, whether folks know it or not. We have come across a couple of, that's the origins of my bamboo trauma was, these folks were planting bamboo as an alternative crop and without knowing that they needed to get a permit for it. So we've had some come through. A lot of it is mostly for biofuels, but some of these crops that are getting proposed, a lot of times they put off a lot of fruits, the things that you want it for your own personal use might also be what makes it invasive. So in terms of permaculture specifically, that's not really on our radar. But if you do hear of some species that are coming into the state that might not be on our radar, you can definitely shoot me an email. If you hit the contact us or me on the IFAS Assessment website.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll just surf the website after we take these questions. Here's another one for you, Deah. Dorothy Caldwell writes, hey, Dorothy, I use both UF-IFAS Assessment and FLEP-C. There seems to be some major differences between the two. Could you please explain?
Well, I will say, full disclosure, I am now the FISC chair. So we've changed our name from Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council to Florida Invasive Species Council. Part of that was to get rid of the exotic. Again, right. We're trying to get rid of that word. But I am the chair of and on the plant listing committee. And so we're trying to integrate what we do a little more. So now species that are being considered for FLEP-C listing, we're trying to run those through the assessment as well. But generally, we have about a 90 to 95% compliance between the two lists. So they're really not that different. I will say that category 2s are more akin to our caution species, and category 1s are more of our red species. That being said, we are going to be, what was I going to say? It's gone. It's gone. Oh, the way that we come to our conclusions is different. So the IFAS assessment is all data-driven. There are tools that have been tested. For example, our predictive model, that's being used all over the world. It's published. It's accurate. So we use those kind of screening tools, whereas the FISC plant list, you fill out a criteria sheet, and then as a committee, we debate. We might have experts come in and tell us, what that species is doing. And then we use consensus building and voting on whether or not we're going to include something on a list or not. So there is a difference in our methodology.
That's great.
But generally, we are lining up.
Dorothy writes again, it seems to be a very popular topic this evening, but she writes, please explain why deflowering jessamine that is listed as caution is a Cat 1, but night flowering jessamine that is listed as highly invasive is not listed on FLEP-C. So I assume that is where you guys are trying to integrate the two systems into one.
Yeah, well, so we have 920 species in our database. So everything that's in the IFAS assessment that's invasive, not recommended, might not be on the FLEPC list, because that is more of like, what are people working on, in terms of management. Also, we have species that are okay to plant, but for the most part, we also have the difference where we do predictive assessments as well. So some of our red listed species are not yet invasive in Florida, but there's so much compelling evidence that they will be if we keep planting them, that that's the difference in the conclusions, where you have invasive, not recommended versus high risk for invasion.
Eric writes, and I'm assuming this one is regarding Stachytarfeta cayennensis, which is the purple porterweed, rather than our native blue porterweed, which is the jamaicensis. So he's wondering, how concerned should we be with purple porterweed? I know that this species, intergrades or intermixes with our native porterweed. Do you have anything to add to that, Deah?
We have it listed as a caution species, and I'm only seeing 2 counties where it's vouchered. And it is on the FISC Category 2 list. So again, it's hard for me to keep up with all 900 species.
Yeah.
I had to look that up real quick. But, I'm not hearing any reports of it spreading, and I actually have one in my yard. So
I've seen it very, very seldomly in natural areas. It's mostly roadside and just in disturbed areas, but I've never personally seen it encroaching into intact native area. And I wanted to comment a little bit just about the question about, I guess, more of like gardening with edibles and risk of using plants. I would say, there you go. Yeah, just to be careful. We do have some species. Water spinach is an aggressive invasive species that is found over, I think, more on the southwest coast of Florida. And that seems to have kind of a cultural connection. It was planted by families that immigrated over to the US, and when they moved around, they left their plants in place. They just took pieces, and so they were able to escape into natural areas. And the same goes for lemongrass. We're finding lemongrass is starting to spread around into some natural areas too. So just be careful, and if you plant it and you move somewhere else, make sure to take it with you or dig it up.
Very good. Thank you so much for that insight. Bonnie writes, adding on to the subject, one of the permaculture plants that I've heard is a possible plant that could become invasive is moringa. Any info on that?
I've heard the same thing. I don't know. Is there an assessment?
We have it in here as a high, the oleifera as a high invasion risk.
Wow.
So the university itself should not be promoting that species. But that's really all I know about it. And actually that risk assessment was completed before I started. I started here.
Excellent question, Bonnie. Thank you so
Very
much
good.
for that. Yeah. So Lauren, and I'm sure a lot of people have really enjoyed this webinar because the questions are just flowing in. And they're saying, can you please give us an email so we can request copies of slides? Thanks for the great presentation. Our email address is coupletfern@gmail.com. So Alex has said that she's going to send some of her slides over. So we'd be happy to share those with you, or we can go ahead and just post them on our website for you guys to check them out at a later time. Probably I'll post them by the end of this week. So yes, so stay tuned for that, and you can always check out our website for additional information in case those slides really appeal to you. Gia writes the same thing. Of course, Gigi is one of our directors. She's wonderful. So she's really enjoying it. I told you guys, you're talking to the choir here, so all the plant lovers are tuning in. Pat Crocker writes, is perennial peanut on track to becoming a species of concern?
I don't think. I asked that question as well. And from what I've been told and the different things that, this is another one that was assessed before I arrived. That it's not encroaching on natural areas, but maybe Alex has a better idea.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think I would just agree with that. I've never seen it encroaching in natural areas, like parking lots, empty grass fields,
Right.
but that's it.
Right. Okay. So let's just surf really quickly onto the IFAS assessment page, and Deah can kind of tell us a little bit about this. Am I adding this on? Yes, there we go. So Deah, if a person has just landed on this page for the first time, what should they check out first?
So I would scroll back up to the top of the page. Most folks who come to the IFAS assessment, they're going to look up, they have an idea of what species they're interested in. So that's why we put right in the middle of that header picture, type here to search a species name. So if you just start typing, say, just if you, it sort of thinks for you. So you can look, it will pull up suggestions based on, common names or scientific names. And then that's one of our species pages. We provide common names, synonyms, the conclusion. We also populated data on growth habit, origin. You can see what tool we use, how often we've reassessed them. And then I tried to put in links for each of the species if they existed to USDA Plants Database, EdMaps, the Florida Plant Atlas, and the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants, if those pages exist. And yeah, that's just a EdMaps map.
Yeah, that's
those are all the different reportings. I think it may be beneficial if you go back one and
go back to the map. Yeah,
go back to the map, and there should be an option to choose like view by county. It may even be the next page. Oh, there you go. And then you can zoom in and see, where it's been vouchered, or well, these are vouchers included as well, Deah, or are these just vouchers and EdMaps reports?
And at this point, from what I understand, all EdMaps points are verified.
Yes.
By folks in the field. And then if you want to go back to the main page of the IFAS assessment one more time, I can just show you some other stuff. Scroll back up. So if you click on assessments in the upper right-hand corner or view all assessments, that will take you to all the species. So you see we have 909 results. Now go back up to the top to filter results. If you click on that drop-down menu, then you can filter by zone, conclusion type, origin, growth habit, and tool used. So once you do that, then you can do data polls. So say you're trying to put a list of species that you're interested in vines that you want to avoid an invasive vine in North Florida. You can pull that information and generate that list for yourself. We also provide pictures. I went through and I think we try up to 3 pictures per species. We didn't pick those pictures for any ID purposes. We wanted it, I'll be frank, we wanted to look cool. So people get on here and they just start looking and the pictures are compelling, and then they start digging in and looking at these pictures if they're just poking around the website. The FAQs up in the right-hand corner, we do have some questions that, common questions, how to cite it, things like that. And then on the main page, there's a link to the EDIS document about our program. We also highlight the newest, so there's garden ginger got put in the database. So some of the new things that go in.
Awesome.
I think that covers everything.
Love it. Yeah, guys, if you are new to IFAS assessment, please check that website out. I love it. And they have the app, which is the I've Got One app. So try to download that. And it all integrates into one IFAS system. It helps people like Alex and Deah really collect data, especially the app if you report not just plants, but also animals. Think about tree frog or Burmese python, and you spot it in an area where it's not known to be. The I've Got One app is great for that.
Right. I just want to be clear that I Got One is not a UF app.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
No. But we do work with, I don't know who got the funding to create the I Got One. Do you know, Alex?
I think it's the University of Georgia.
Yeah.
So Bug would put all that together, but we do work very closely with their technical team. We're both land grant institutions. We help each other out, so we can't take credit for that one.
Okay.
Remember that EdMaps is a great tool. It's where a lot of and I'm guilty of not using it as much as I should, but it is where a lot of land managers share information about invasive species. It's our way of having one place to go where we can kind of announce, hey, I found this right here. And then, if you're looking around in your backyard, you can see what's new. You can have alerts sent to you based on different species that are documented. So it's a great tool.
Yeah. And we've got fan mail coming in now. Dorothy Caldwell says, great presentation. Orange Audubon Society says, thanks for the information. We have an out-of-state fan. Great presentation. Thanks so much. Listening from Pennsylvania, where we have more than our fair share of invasives as well.
I'm an Ohio gal, so I could probably talk to you about a lot of those.
Folks, we're closing in. If you have any last remaining comments, now is the time before I thank Alex and Deah for their awesome presentation. Alex, are there any parting words at this point that you'd like to share with the public? Any closing comments?
I know I don't really have to say too much to inspire these folks to go out and go for a hike and look around and just be aware of the plants in your area. But I'd say just, you can help your local agencies and land managers out by reporting invasive species and continue to champion natives and to plant natives when you can. So thank you for your interest and your efforts in helping us to create better habitats.
Yeah, thank you. And Deah, what about you?
I would echo that 100% and just say, like, again, we're preaching to the choir here, but if you have a question about a plant, before you go and introduce it to your landscape, like, take the time to check it out before you do that. I think that's more of a maybe a bigger gardening community notion. But also, if you have the time and the interest to volunteer to help out, every year we have weed wrangles and, different opportunities that you can go and, like, get dirty and go pull some of these things out of the environment and make a little bit of an impact. It feels good.
It is. And here at Couple Fern, we love invasive pulls. Mm-hmm. Gets all our aggression out.
Yeah.
Kevin writes, thank you for the opportunity to learn. Fabulous. Hi, Kevin. Kevin's a member of ours as well, so nice to always hear from him. So, folks, we're going to conclude our webinar for tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next month when we are with Florida conservation builders, and they'll be talking about some of their success stories on conservation lands across the state. So, Deah and Alex, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.